Hey guys, welcome to my vegetable garden space. So we've had a long hot streak this summer. It's the cool part of the evening, which I feel is appropriate to maybe go over what I have going on here. I also want to begin by saying this is one of my favorite areas in our yard. There's something for me that's so fulfilling and magical about growing vegetables from seed. I know that I've talked about this before, where it's inevitable that you take pride, whether you just get something to sprout or if you actually get fruit to harvest. Either way, it distracts you and takes you to, another very green-oriented zone in life. I was a kid who grew up with a vegetable garden. I did not always appreciate it as a kid, especially I lived on a property where you had to drag out the hose, and it was like an ordeal. And there was something about wrapping the hose up that made everything seem like such work, which is why I have a close water source, which is right behind the camera. And there's no dragging a hose out 200 feet and then wrapping it back up. I also really love folding Caleb into the mix with the vegetable garden. I like knowing what he takes interest in and growing it for the both of us. And it's something that I get to take care of. And then at the end of the year, it's one of my favorite types of afternoons is harvesting from the garden with my husband to, talk about escaping the present situation and taking your mind elsewhere. To escape that with somebody else is always, it's one of those feelings that I really look forward to or it's what I feel most gratitude for. Yeah, it has been an interesting year for the vegetable garden, weather-wise and pest-wise. I began with this garden space a little bit in a disarray, and spring came fast and hard this year, and I quite honestly didn't know if I was going to put it together, but I eventually came around to this idea of this will be something that pays off in garden spades if I can just put a little time and work into it. And if I can find a before clip of what this looked like just 2 months ago, it's what got me a little bit slower to actually planting up this space. I didn't have all the resources that I needed to fix this up, and ideally what I wanted to get, I didn't, so I made do with what I had around the house, and I'll point some of that out maybe at the end. If I can find my before clip, I will put it at the end of the video so you can see where I was starting from 2 months ago. I'm gonna put Maybelline down and let's see what's in frame. Right here I put 2 summer squash. I originally seeded 4. 1 didn't come up and the other one sort of petered out early on in the season, but the 2 that have really taken over this space have just been great performers. I always expect something around 6 fruit per plant with summer squash. I have long ago exceeded that. There's been a lot of stir fry in our house for dinner over the summer. I mean, even as you can see, it's just blooming like crazy still. I will probably continue to get squash throughout the summer, maybe even into the fall, depending on our weather. It feels like every time I turn and look, there's another one ready to pick. Right here, I have a little pepper lane. I harvested the seeds from my bell peppers last year. I got 1 bell pepper so far this summer, which it's still a little bit early, but I'm dealing a little bit of what I think is an earwig pest problem. And then also randomly, this is not a bell pepper. I'm almost 100% sure this is a poblano pepper, which I found a new recipe that Caleb and I really enjoy. And so I've been just letting this guy do its thing because I'm going to fold this in whenever it comes ready for harvest in maybe, I don't know, a couple of weeks? Not a couple of weeks, a couple of days. And then next to it, I have some herbs. So I have some, I don't know what kind of variety of basil this is. Some of it has really good structure, some of it is starting to bolt, and some of it does not have good structure, it's just flopping over like crazy. And then I have a random Italian parsley plant. I love parsley. I know that a lot of people think that this is just a garnish or a throwaway type of flavor when you're cooking. I don't know why. It is delicious. So I wasn't quite sure how big this variety was going to get. So next year I know that if I stick with the same variety, I maybe want to include a few more if I really want to harvest and work with parsley and cooking a lot. This year I went all out on jalapeno peppers. I want to perfect or at least standardize for our family recipe of jalapeno poppers. I made a great recipe a couple years ago and then I lost it, of course, and ever since then I've been trying to get back to it, and there's something about homegrown jalapenos that make the spice more present, and that's something that we appreciated from the first year because I used homegrown peppers. And I don't know if my recipes have just been bad ever since because they're store-bought. Not that there's anything wrong with store-bought, but I've just been trying to focus on growing a decent harvest so I can potentially have 2 or 3 batches testing the recipe and finding out, or just like I said, standardizing what our family preference is for jalapeno poppers. I don't know if you can see this. I will have to get a close-up, but this year I'm going to attempt to pickle cucumbers. And so I bought a pickling variety. I believe it's Boston cucumber. Some of these are already becoming ready to harvest, and I have plenty of blooms and little pickles that will be on their way to harvest in a couple weeks most likely. There's something going on here and I'm not quite sure if it's a water issue, but I've now messed with the water in the aspect of I have moved the target so much that I'm probably doing more harm to these plants than benefit because it doesn't know where to rely on its water. And so this might be a powdery mildew in addition to a water issue problem. Again, I'm not quite sure, but it's still jamming and doing its thing, and that's fine. So along this side and behind me, another thing that I went all out on this year was tomatoes. And this is one of Caleb's favorite fruits in the garden space, so I planted a plethora of them. The goal was to plant enough that I can have a couple of new cooking recipes, which I think I'm going to give one a go in a couple days. But I also want enough to make our own either Bloody Mary mix from fresh tomatoes or a small batch of family sauce. Caleb does an amazing job with this family red sauce, and I want to know what that would be like with fresh tomatoes. So from our seeds from last year, I have planted a bunch. You can see I have a hole right behind me. Some have performed better than others, and because they were open pollinated last year, I'm not quite sure what I'm getting from these this year. I've already harvested a bunch of tomatoes this week, so they should continue throughout the heat of the summer. There might be a little taper off and a dieback, but even from picking this morning, I can see a couple that I could still pick today. And these are ripening at like cherry size up to full like Roma and big or Cherokee red type of size. I've been really happy with the way our tomato plants have been growing this year. All right, so I'm going to move the camera and walk you through the rest of the space. All right, so we just shifted over. This is the center of our vegetable garden. This was the first year that I really made an effort to get to know onions. And I plant alliums because in the landscaping because I just love their bulbous blooms and my pollinators love them. But for functional eating alliums, I mean, you can see one of them is blooming. This has been a learning curve for me. And so over here I had yellow onions and over here I had red. And one of the original goals with planting onions is, again, it goes back to like, what are we eating? Caleb makes an amazing French onion soup. And so when thinking about functional things to use for what we need and shop for, I needed a bunch of yellow or white cooking onions. And I planted a whole bed full. They were not great performers for me. And I think that's just what I'm doing. I think there was also a little bit of a inconsistent water issue at hand, if I will be fully honest. But there is a giant weed right here. Some of them have really bulbed up and were ready for harvest. And then, as you can see, there's a couple of them I just left in here to see what they would be doing, just as an experiment as a gardener of, well, what happens if I leave them in a little bit longer. And I've been leaving the smaller ones in, and I think some of them have just broken down and decomposed, and some of them are still jamming and doing their thing. Unfortunately, their time's up. Today, I am digging up the rest of them because I'm going to be putting in some of my fall crop harvest seeds today. That's what I'm doing there. And you'll also notice I like to plant marigolds. I was talking about pest issues this year, or that I've been having this year, and I plant marigolds for two reasons. One, they are color. Earlier on, they attract pollinators to the vegetables that I want to have pollinated to produce the fruit. And then two, the smell that comes off from marigolds is actually a deterrent to a lot of common vegetable garden pests. So I like to always fold a few in the garden beds every year. I don't know if you can tell, but beside me and behind me, well, there's some trotting behind me, that's Rupert, but I have planted corn. I have a love-hate relationship with corn. Once upon a time, in our garden bed, I think 7 years ago, we planted corn. It did well. We didn't get a lot of corn, but we had a few ears, and that was all we really needed. And then we decorated with it, so this idea of this dual purpose aspect of the corn was beneficial. And ever since, I have not been able to properly grow and harvest a full ear of corn since. It's always been, at best, I will get fall decoration worthy stalks. And this year, I planted all of these at the same time. And there's that old saying of knee-high by the 4th of July. Some of these are a little bit taller than that, and some of these are like wrist high. Again, I'm going to say I have a water issue I need to identify in this space, or again, I think there's a pest issue that I need to address. I'm not sure. But the exciting thing is, as I walked through the space earlier before I started filming, I have one ear of corn that is coming up. And I am just thrilled for it. If there is one kernel on it that is delicious, I will be so happy. But I also have some ants in the space, and generally I don't like ants in my vegetable garden, but they're really great at pollinating corn, especially if there's not a whole lot of wind going on that's helping to do it naturally. They're just a natural way to pollinate your corn. So again, experimenting this year with corn, I'm being persistent and always trying to grow it. That's what I'm doing this year. Oh, and here are more tomato plants. Again, I went crazy with them this year, but there are more right here. All right, so on the other end of our garden space, this is where I dedicated a lot of my early leaf vegetables. So my lettuces and kale I put over here that have long been done. But I have put in my bush beans, which are starting to perform very well right now. And what I'm actually most excited about is this. It's another variety of summer squash. It's called like a Bennington squash, I believe. I have tried to grow it, I think 3 years now, and I've never actually got fruit to harvest. And again, I think it's just an issue with me. I'm always looking for new and interesting things to experiment with, as well as knowing what performs well for me and exploring things that I also use in cooking all the time. And those are the three components that I always look for when planning out my vegetable garden. And this is a variety of squash that is new to me. I don't know what it's like. I don't know what to use it for cooking. I don't know how it cooks, etc., etc. And I also can't find it in stores to experiment with it. So the only solution is to grow it. and I am ecstatic. This is the first year I've put it in the back, so it gets a lot of intense morning sun and then some shaded, well, filtered sun throughout the afternoon. And then, as you can see, in the later part of the afternoon or early evening, it's just full shade. And it blew up this area, and there's already fruit on it. So I am stoked for this. And then here is, again, vegetables that I am always super determined to try and figure out. I've been trying to grow these, the yellow bear tomatoes for years, and for some reason I can always get them to sprout. I can never get them to take off. And this year, I think I have found a spot that they love. So these tomatoes are separate intentionally over here. I know that I have dozens elsewhere in the garden, but I'm really thrilled and excited for these. And then up here, I actually plant peanuts every year. And I don't plant a lot because they take forever to grow. I think something like 4 months. Every year, I only grow it for the sole purpose of, and this is gonna be ridiculous, I always make a small homemade batch of peanut butter. And I make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for both myself and Caleb. And every year, without thinking about it, he always says, wow, this was really good, or something to the effect of, what kind of peanut butter is this? I really like it. And it's always the homegrown kind, and I always tell him every year, these are from the peanuts in our garden. And then because he's a little forgetful sometimes, frequently, like it's some sort of surprise every year that he didn't know that I grew peanuts. I think that's it. So I will do a fall share of what I've got going on in my vegetable garden. I was a little nervous about this because this always feels like a very private, intimate place for me. It's like our little family garden that has wins and losses and things that are doing well and things that aren't, and it's a source for food, and it's a place where we share memories and fun, intimate conversations. And I actually had fun talking about this generally, so I'm gonna do it again. I think I am going to show you what I'm gonna harvest from my garden space today, and if it's not too late before it's time to prep for dinner, I might plant my fall harvest seeds today. All right, so I've got my garden satchel full, and that's it. So I hope you've been botanically inspired. Let me know what's performing well in your vegetable garden. Remember to grow from where you're planted, and I'll share more with you soon. Cheers. I did not do garden cleanup last year, and I was distracted by bunch of things. It's amazing how quickly something can get overrun. So this will be up and looking pretty and fixed and perfect, and yeah, this might not be updated for, who knows, a while. I mean, there's a tree growing in this garden bed. Yeah, so might not be updated for a while, and the blooms will be out, but this is the beginning.